Hi, welcome to Beyond Buzzwords, what a diverse and inclusive environment really means. My name is Lashana Lewis. I'm the director of St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective. We'll get started a little bit about me, then we'll move into a little bit about agenda, and then I'll have some contact information at the end where you'll be able to be in contact with me and get a little bit more information about who we are and what we do. By the way, if you stick around for a bit, please do visit our virtual booth for BioSTL. The Equity Collective will be there, as well as other programs of BioSTL. Let's get started. All right, about me. Here's a quick slide that has a bevy of information about myself, but the quick version of it is that I am CEO of LGBTQIA Consulting, which is a diversity consulting firm contracted through BioSTL for me to be director of the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective. But at LMO's Consulting, we actually do some diversity consulting for businesses after they've had their diversity training. So a lot of businesses have their training and they're a little bit stumped afterwards as to what to do to actually align their initiatives, and that's where we come in to help. I've been an entrepreneur in the tech and diversity fields for very many years. I've been associated with startups within the St. Louis region and currently serve as the director of IT for a startup called Giveable in the St. Louis region. Look them up at giveable.org if you want to check them out and find out a little bit more about how you can do charitable giving on a micro donation basis. I was also selected in February 2019 as a Fulbright specialist. Unfortunately, due to coronavirus, I was not able to embark on the intercontinental versions of visiting another country and helping with a particular project in regards to diversity. But fortunately, the clock will start again with me being a Fulbright specialist after coronavirus has ended, so to speak, and it's free for us to travel around the globe again. I've also volunteered as a planetarium guide at the St. Louis Science Center. I've been going there ever since I was a little kid, about 10 years old. And fortunately, as an adult, I was able to go in and help do some star shows. And for those who know me, they know that I love all things space, including NASA. And it's kind of a nice joy. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do it again due to COVID-19, but hopefully I'll get started again soon. I sit on the board of various different organizations as well as committees. And I was also a founder of the LGBT Center between um, 2004 to 2011 in the St. Louis region. All right, let's look at our agenda here. First, we're going to go through a glossary of terms. I want to be able to kind of put everybody on the same page. I never assume that everyone knows all of these different acronyms and different buzzwords that we hear floating through the office and through social media. So this is an attempt to get everyone on the same page. I'll talk a little bit about the context in which we'll explore these terminologies being implemented within the business sense or within the workplace environment. I'll give some examples. An exercise that I promise is not running, even though that's what the little graphic guy says, but it will be more so something that you can do on your own to kind of get you started on your journey of an inclusive workplace environment. And then I'll give some contact information at the end so that you can come back and talk to me, talk to anyone with the collective, and get a little bit more in-depth knowledge about what we do and how we can help. All right, let's get into those glossary terms. Well, you've heard of DEI. Some people call it DIE or DNI. I prefer DEI, and that stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of people see that as interchangeable. They're all the same thing when they're not. Diversity does involve having a variety of different people from different backgrounds, but the equity version is to make sure that everyone is on the same level. So whatever you need to do to make sure that everyone is kind of on par. The inclusion part is that when you bring these people in and you put them all on par, let's make sure that we're listening to them and we're actually implementing things that are going to be um, easier to allow people to kind of join in the conversation and feel worthy of being a part of an effort or a project. The LGBTQIA community, you'll hear that. Some people like to say LGBT, some say LGBT plus, and it all is kind of an umbrella term to talk about one particular community. LGBTQIA breaks down into lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, intersex, and asexual. And those are specific portions of the community, but the description gets longer and includes more as we discover more and more identities. A lot of people either use LGBTQIA, and that's what the plus is for, is to identify additional people in the community, or it's just LGBT plus. Racial equity, I love this definition. I'll let you read it here. But I got this from Ford through Ferguson's call to action summary of terms. And I think it really does give you a good um, kind of mental picture of what racial equity actually looks like. And basically, we're thinking about breaking down barriers and making things a lot more equitable as far as equal opportunities, and also eliminating the systemic racism within policies and procedures. One person did this fabulous discussion where they said that when you talk about institutionalized racism, actually what they're talking about is if you remove all the racists from within a particular institution, and it still would operate in a disproportionate way, even without those players in there. Let's move into gender parity. We're talking about the ratio of genders in a given situation or scenario. So some people confuse this sometimes with gender equity. Gender equity is like making sure that you have kind of this equal balance of people who represent different genders. Whereas gender parity is the actual ratio. Is it 2 to 1? Is it 75% or 0.75? The ultimate number you want to get is 1. That means that, you know, for every gender spectrum that's represented, that they're there, and they're all on equal footing and equal level. Um, there has been talk within the accessibility and disability community about language to use in order to describe someone that relates to a particular identity. So you'll hear something called people first or person first language. I, in particular, identify with what's called the neurodiverse community. And a lot of us are labeled on what's called the autism spectrum disorder. Unfortunately, for some people, the first thing they do, they're like, you're an autistic, or you're an autistic person. Um, Instead of using a person first language of you're a person with autism. Now, this varies, and I actually have a slide for you on that because I was just talking to my wife about it. And we were saying, you know, what do you do when you actually are not exactly sure, because you're like, well, some people say that it's okay to say this and whatever. Ask. Always ask. There is no, excuse me, absolutely right way to say something or refer to someone that is universally agreed upon across the board. Always just ask. And that's usually the easiest way to find out exactly how to approach a particular person or particular group of people. So, all right, I've told you all of these good terms and definitions, and you're like, okay, Lashana, what is the context of all of this? What does this have to do with my workplace environment? It's great that you're teaching me and telling me these things, but why is it important to me as an employer? Well, let's talk a little bit about that context. When you have issues with racial and gender bias, implicit bias, that often leads to a homogeneous employee base. So you tend to hire people that you feel the most comfortable with, or you're familiar with, or that lives down the street from you, or someone that you know of. And the problem with that is that homogeneous employee base leads to a homogeneous customer base, because you end up serving people that look a lot more like you. And this may seem a little innocuous at first. You might think, "Oh, no, I don't see color. I don't understand. It's not a problem. My customer is my customer." Well, let's look at a few examples. I've pulled some examples off of the internet. All of these things that you're going to see, you can go to these websites and view these articles yourself. But here's one here from The Verge, where MIT's Media Lab went and looked at some facial recognition algorithms that were designed by big companies, as you can see there. And they saw that there were error rates up to 35% higher when detecting the gender of dark skinned women compared to lighter skinned men. Now, you're like, okay, well, what's the problem with that? A more innocuous version of that would be if, for instance, when I go into the restroom and my wife is in there with me, and my wife identifies as white, and she is going and washing her hands in the automated sensor, and I go up to go get the water running to get in the automated sensor and get the soap, and then I'm doing this the whole day, trying to get it to work. So that's an annoying thing. But on the flip side of that, we're talking about self-driving cars now. This AI is being implemented in there. So what happens when a self-driving car isn't seeing a darker skinned woman as opposed to a lighter skinned man? We're running into real problems at that point. So when we're looking at facial recognition and we're kind of trying to determine things like that, we need to think on a broader scope about it. Another example here, when we come to gender bias, and I found this article here at the Washington Post where they talked about this use of female test dummies. And I said to myself, seen female crash test dummies. That's nothing new. Well, actually, guess what is new? What is new is that female crash test dummies were traditionally not put into the driver's seat of cars when they were tested. So all of these nice National Highway Safety Traffic Association, numbers and all of this stuff, where they're telling you the percentage and the safety rating and all of this good stuff, was based off of male drivers being in the driver's seat. And if I'm not mistaken, this female crash test dummy test didn't really start with the female crash test dummies in the driver's seat until 2011. So it kind of makes you think when you think about like what year car you have. Who was it made for, and whose safety was it made for? And you see here, 47% higher chance of serious injuries over male belted drivers in comparable collisions. Um, eHarmony. So some of you are older like me, and you remember this lawsuit in 2007 where eHarmony said that it didn't have an algorithm for dating and matching up same-sex couples. And eHarmony, being based in California, uh, was going against an anti-gay policy within that same state that said you can't exclude same-sex couples or people who identify as gay or lesbian, um, who were looking for same-sex partners within any of your products or services that you offer. But the lawsuit happened. They ended up changing a lot of their software, and I think they developed another one. Then it all ended up kind of coalescing and becoming one again. But within each one of these examples, think about the people who are behind the scene working on these particular products, who are doing the R&D and the crash test dummy research, and uh, and the hand sensors and the self-driving cars. Are these people thinking as diverse as they possibly could, as inclusive as they possibly could, about the products that they're producing for that company? I got one more example here, where it talks about someone who is a person who was unable to use their eyes. They were visually impaired in some sort of way. And a person who's visually impaired usually uses some sort of software to read the website to them. And I've heard it called JAWS and a few other ones. But basically, for that website to work, it has to be able to be ADA compliant and have all of these different additions within the background of its coding. You would think that this particular issue happened a long time ago, but this was in 2017, so not too far away. But the website for Winn-Dixie, which is a big grocery store chain, was not applicable for these different software that would be able to read the website to you. And there was this argument back and forth about whether the website was actually beholden to the ADA policies, because it was a website and it wasn't a public facility that you could walk into. And then they determined, because you order things online, that it actually is, the same as walking into a store. So thus it must be ADA compliant. And all of this back and forth. And one of the interesting things I found out in the article is that after all of this big fuss, after all of this lawsuit, um, an analysis was made as far as how much it would have actually cost Winn-Dixie to make their website ADA compliant, and it was something like $30,000. Now compare that with the cost of a lawsuit. So it seems like, because of some of the inability to see the need for accessibility differences within the website, that something ended up costing way more than it needed to. And then again, you have to ask yourself, would making my company more diverse, more inclusive, and more equitable would have changed the outcome of this? Would this have been caught early on? So people say, okay, Sean, that's great. Shauna, you've given me a lot of information. You've scared the bejeebies out of me. So what do I do now? Well, one of the things I tend to do is I give people this exercise that I'll show you. Like I said, it's homework. You don't have to show anybody, but it's a good way to kind of be able to mitigate some bias. This is from Harvard University's website. It's called the implicit bias test, or implicit association test. It is free to access. It's free to take the test. It can be completely anonymous. As you see right here, there's links here. You'll see that it asks for an email address here. That's if you just want additional information. You do not have to put an email address in there. You can just simply click on the link. And once you click on the link for either social attitudes, mental health, or featured task, you'll get another screen. And in this example, I've clicked on social attitudes. Once you click there, it will give you a list of different tests that are available. There are more than this, but for this particular one, you'll see the social attitudes includes one about race, and race is one that I've used for this example. And it says it requires the ability to distinguish faces of European and African origin. It indicates that most Americans have an automatic preference for white over black. So if you click this button here, you'll get this pop-up screen. Notice that it says that you're going to have to use your keys E and I. So it's just kind of like a video game. E and I keys are your two control keys. And categorize items in groups as fast as you can. There are 4 different groups. And what they'll show you is this list of good associated uh, uh, descriptors, then there'll be bad associated descriptors, and then you'll see a face that's either a generic African American face or a generic European American face. And you're going to have only so many seconds to actually categorize a face within these good or bad categories. There's 7 parts. It does say you need to pay attention. I have tried to cheat this test so many times. I will say that it is almost impossible to cheat. But one of the good things you will find out from it is that it will tell you a lot about yourself. For example, I tell people I've taken the test myself, and when I first took it many years ago, I found out that I had a bias against African American faces, which surprised me because I grew up in a 98% African American community. But then I had to sit and think about it. During that time of me growing up, and we're talking about late 70s, early 80s, I had access to TV, newspapers, magazines, all sorts of media that basically kind of reinforced the stereotype to me that Black was bad. So even though I grew up in an environment that should have told me differently, I was still kind of influenced by these outside sources that I thought were probably very ancillary to my development, but had embedded something within me. So I actively worked and actively sat down and said to myself, I need to do something about this. And it was a matter of me just kind of changing the way I think about somebody walking up to me, or the perception of everything from intelligence level to intent of people around me. And after I took the test again several years later, I was right at 50-50. So in order to kind of start doing this work within your company, I suggest you start it with yourself. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So while you're going through and deciding to do all of these different changes, I said that I have a diversity consulting firm, but first, before that, I said diversity training. And I think diversity training is important because, again, it does like I did at the beginning. It puts everyone on same level and equal footing so that you can all talk with the same language and have the same level of knowledge and the same level of understanding. After that, whenever you're going into actually starting to make the changes, I do heavily suggest that people do a diversity consultant and they go and talk to them about some of the things that are happening and some of the things they want to change. The consultant can do everything from maybe suggest additional specified training to going in like I do and actually looking at some of the employee manuals and standard operating procedures, dress codes, things like that, that are hindrance, as well as hiring and retention policies, where you would probably need to kind of look at, where are you recruiting? How are you recruiting? Um, what type of people are you normally bringing in? What does your internship program look like? Your apprenticeship program? Is it paid? Do people have to find a way to, live out there on their own during your apprenticeship while they're doing all of it for free, or are you providing free housing? The little things like that that maybe were barriers for a particular demographic that you might not have ever thought of before. And then the last thing that I say, and I say it very loudly and over again, HR is not DEI. Don't make your HR professional do double duty. HR has its purpose, and it is basically to make sure you are processing paperwork and doing things on a very legal basis when it comes to processing that information, which is great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your HR professional needs to do diversity, equity, inclusion work. What I highly suggest for people is that if you want to keep it in-house, you create a position that solely is dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion within your company. Even if you can't hire someone specifically for that, those diversity consultants I just mentioned earlier have fractional chief diversity officer services. So it's kind of like an a la carte. of different services that are available for people who can't afford a full out CDO. But I do highly suggest that you at least either carve out a specific position of a chief diversity officer or someone that is like VP of diversity and inclusion, full-time or part-time basis, but that is a specific job that they have to do. Or you go with a diversity consulting firm and maybe have a fractional CDO come in and be able to perform those duties for you. Doing this implicit association test is a good first step. And I wanted to kind of leave you today with something that you felt like you can grab hold to. But again, the final thing that you would need to do is make sure you have someone whose work is dedicated to this to be able to help you transition to the diverse and inclusive workspace and workplace that you're looking to have. All right, let's get into some contact information for me. Over here, you'll see on the left-hand side personal contact information for myself, LaShawna Lewis, as well as my Twitter handle, LinkedIn, and website for Ellen Lewis Consulting, which is my diversity consulting firm. That has a link there for booking in the upper right hand corner. You can click that. And if you ever want to make an appointment to speak with me, I offer free consultation for the first hour. More than happy to do that. On the right hand side, you have information of the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective. If you want to learn more about joining the Equity Collective, you can be a member, you can be a partner, you can be a sponsor. All of that is available on the website. You'll have our Twitter link there. You also have a link to our LinkedIn where we post some of the articles that have a little bit more information public facing about what we do and who we are. So thank you for hanging in there with me through this session, and I look forward to answering your questions at the end. Make sure you check the app, and I should be there.